Hi, I'm Steffany Strange. Want to hear something scary?
We were pleasantly surprised when our parents announced a vacation to Hawaii. Excitement filled the air as my sister Seema and I immediately began packing our bags. Now, Seema, in particular, was overjoyed beyond words. Her lifelong fascination with mermaids made her believe that visiting the Hawaiian Islands would provide a genuine opportunity to encounter the Namaka, the captivating Hawaiian goddess of the sea. Upon our arrival at the hotel in the early evening, my parents entrusted me with the task of looking after Seema in her room while they stepped out for a swift dinner. Meanwhile, we ordered room service. Seema, however, had other plans. She pleaded with me to go to the beach and search for Namaka. At first, I declined because I really wanted to enjoy the luxury of having this nice hotel room all to ourselves. But her begging wore me down, and eventually, I agreed as long as she promised not to tell her parents. After all, who wants to come back grounded from a vacation? We ventured out of the hotel towards the water. Seema rushed into the waves splashing around. The beach was still fairly busy, so I watched her from the shoreline. An hour passed, and I began to worry that our parents might have returned. I called out to Seema, urging her to come out of the water. However, as we turned around to leave, there was nobody there. The beach had become eerily empty. I thought to myself, there are probably people clearing out due to the sun going down. Nothing crazy. Suddenly, a haunting melody reached our ears, its beauty captivating us in an instant. We exchanged bewildered glances before Seema ran off into the direction of the sound. I called after her, but I wasn't about to chase her down. After a few moments, Seema shouted back at me, unable to contain her excitement. "Melanie, look, it's a mermaid!" I rolled my eyes. Seema was so gullible. It was bound to be one of those women who dress up for tourists. I headed up to the shore toward her voice. I couldn't believe my eyes. In the light of the sunset, I saw the face of a girl. We cautiously approached the young girl. Drawn in by her enchanting song, she possessed luscious white hair and a face of ethereal beauty. But as we ventured closer, the melody took on a darker tone. The sound intensified, growing deeper and more dissonant. And then I saw she had no legs, just a fin. Panic washed over me, and I desperately lunged forward, reaching out to grab Seema and pull her away from the strange creature. But it was too late. The mermaid, who was now in front of us, began to transform. Her once lovely hair fell out into clumps, and her once musical lips were now sewn shut. Her eyes bulged out of their sockets, streaming with blood. Her skin turned jet black as her bones contorted into horrifying features. Her claws were already firmly clasped around my sister's fragile neck, squeezing the life out of her. Seema's screams pierced the air, a heart-wrenching plea for help that seemed to go unheard in the desolate surroundings. Tears streamed down my face as I watched in horror. My mind racing with desperation. I couldn't let my sister die like this. Summoning every ounce of strength and courage, I lunged myself at the creature, clawing at its twisted limbs, doing anything to try and free Seema from its grip. But the monster was relentless. Its strength far beyond my own. With a sickening sound, it unleashed a fury of savage scratches upon Seema's chest. She cried in anguish. The once beautiful melody that lured us now transformed into a nightmare anguish, accompanying my sister's screams. As I fought fruitlessly against the monster, I felt a searing pain across my own body. I realized that my desperate struggle had left me vulnerable, and the hideous creature had seized the opportunity. It swiftly turned its attention to me, its bloodshot eyes locking onto my helpless form. In an instant, its talons wrapped around my throat. I struggled for air, clawing at the creature's hands, but it was all in vain. Darkness closed in around me, suffocating my senses as I witnessed the life force slowly drain from my sister's eyes. Seema's desperate cries filled the air, but I was powerless to save her. The monster was far stronger than I could have ever imagined. This was not the fairy tale mermaid Seema had read about in her books. I watched helplessly as my sister's life slowly drained away, her innocent spirit extinguished by the merciless claws of a monster. The creature's grip on my throat tightened, and I felt the warmth of my own blood mixing with salt water. "Help," I whispered weakly, desperate, knowing that there was no one to answer my plea. The world faded around me as darkness closed in. When I woke up, I found myself in the depths of the sea. My legs had been torn from my body, replaced by a grotesque tail. The pain was excruciating, but it was nothing compared to the torment of my soul. I was no longer human. I had become the creature of the sea, forever cursed to live beneath the waves. Now I reside in the ocean, waiting for unsuspecting children who come searching for mermaids. They are lured by our once beautiful voices, only to meet a horrifying fate. They too join us, trapped in an eternal cycle of misery, victims of their own curiosity and our haunting melodies. I wish I could help it, but it's too late. This is who I am.
Shyla was hurrying to finish her makeup for school when she slammed the medicine chest shut and cracked her mirror. She knew the old superstition that breaking a mirror meant bad luck, but she didn't have time for all that Bloody Mary or trapped souls kids stuff. Besides the spiderweb crack, it was still in one piece, and she finished applying her lipstick. "Oh, I must need coffee," she thought suddenly, as a strange feeling came over her. She ignored it, assuming tiredness and a cold draft from the window had given her a chill. She grabbed a travel mug and headed to school. Much later, she awoke in the middle of the night, that same strange feeling in her gut. She walked to the bathroom to splash water on her face. Wearily, she noticed something didn't look quite right with her reflection, like the glass was dirty. Looking more closely, the face that stared back wasn't her. It was her, but it wasn't. While her own mouth began to open in shock, her reflected face began to grin unnaturally. Her eyes were now jet black orbs like bottomless pits. Although frightened, she took a step closer, her nose practically touching the glass. "How can this?" Suddenly, two arms shot out of the mirror and wrapped around her in a tight grip, dragging her into and through the mirrored surface. Shyla looked back through the mirror to see something standing where she had just been. A creature that looked just like her, but not her. It waved back before disappearing out of the room. After uselessly pounding on the mirror to escape, sobbing, then passing out from exhaustion and shock, Shyla awoke and finally began to explore the place she was being held captive in. It was just a wide, empty space, and instead of windows into the outside, she realized they were the mirrors in her house. In one, she saw her brother Oscar putting gel in his hair, probably getting ready for a date. Did he not notice she was missing? He put some aftershave on his neck before giving himself a wink. Then, all of a sudden, the door opened and a figure walked in. At first, it was hard to make out who it was, but as the moonlight touched its face, two glistening black-orbed eyes shone in the light. It was the mirror doppelganger. Slapping her hand on her side of the mirror, she cried out to Oscar. "That's not me!" she screamed, but it was no good. He couldn't hear her. He turned towards the imposter as it stared at her. Suddenly, it grabbed Oscar, hugging him and patting his hair while staring at her. Then, smiling evilly, it left the room. He seemed safe for now, just perplexed at his sister's sudden odd behavior. Later, she saw her dad shaving to prepare for work. And there the evil creature was again, inching its way in from the door. It crept closer to her father and bumped into him as his blade was touching his skin. Blood gushed on his white button-down. He scolded the evil doppelganger as if it were her. "Be more careful, Shyla. Look at this." The real Shyla wept on the other side of the mirror. "It's not me, Dad. It's not me." But he couldn't hear. It stared at her from its side of the mirror, reveling in her pain. Days passed. She had no idea how long she'd been trapped. As hard as Shyla tried, she couldn't seem to get out. Who knows what the creature was doing or what it wanted, pretending to be her. Then, just as Shyla was about to give up hope, the imposter showed up in front of her mirror. It reached back through the cracked mirror, dragging her to the other side. Just like that, it was over, and she was home. Shyla ran out of the room. She passed by her brother first, but froze in the doorway. Oscar was talking into his phone and was holding a knife, shaking, whispering about something being horribly wrong with his sister, of being afraid to go to sleep at night. Scared to approach him, she hurried on to find her dad. He looked haggard, worried, and unkempt, with several bandages on his hands and one eye bandaged. She ran over to hug him, but he jumped up from his chair and warily backed away, saying he would get help for her, but none of them would be able to forgive everything that she'd done that easily. Shyla didn't know what the doppelganger had done to her family. "Please, Daddy," she cried. "It wasn't me. It's the mirror, the broken mirror in my bathroom." But her dad just turned away. Confused and upset, Shyla left to find her friends at their usual hangout, and as they saw her coming, they fled, calling back, "Stay away from us, you psychopath." Psychopath. What had that terrible thing done to her life? She walked back home with mixed feelings, relieved to be back, but devastated by the fallout. How could she ever explain it? Any of it? And suddenly, she felt angry. She hadn't done anything. It was the mirror. She ran into the house and tore the cracked mirror off the wall, smashing it to pieces and dumping it in the trash can outside. Sighing in relief, Shyla headed back inside to find her dad and to try to explain, to apologize. But she stopped as she saw him sitting on the couch. An impossibly wide grin stretched across his face, because she knew what it was. She could even see the jet black orbs of that thing staring back at her from her father's face. Its broken whisper echoed all around. "Too late. Daddy already looked in the mirror, and now I'm back."
Despite horror movies being extremely rare in Egypt, Yassine, an inspiring director, felt like he had the perfect script. The story was simple. After the death of his only daughter, a grief-stricken doctor leaves his family home and moves into an old mansion only to experience some violent hauntings. So he calls a spiritualist to investigate. Yassine had cast a real-life spiritualist for the role who had expert knowledge of the paranormal. Saeed El-Husseini Al-Fayek was well known for specializing in black magic. Yassine encouraged him to act as he typically would during an investigation. When they were shooting the exorcism scene, the crew watched in awe as the spiritualist recited a powerful incantation. The spiritualist read Al-Tizar Al-Blar Hatya, written in an ancient language and needed to be chanted at a very specific pace. In addition, the precise pronunciation of each word was required in order to banish jinns. As Al-Fayek ended the monologue, the crew cheered. Less than 10 people in the world could perform it correctly, as it takes many years to master. Any small mistake could be catastrophic, since it was believed that no spirit could disobey a summoning incantation. Once performed, the words opened the door for the spirit realm, allowing entry to the human world. Yasin was thrilled with the performance and asked a cinematographer to check the footage. But as they began to watch, they were baffled to discover most of the footage was distorted. When the scene with Alfayek's big moment began to play, the cameraman looked in horror. "Sir," he mumbled, "who are these people?" His fingers shook as he pointed towards the screen. Yasin stared at the screen in disbelief. There were shadows of people in the footage who had not been on the set. The director insisted it was probably just something on that reel, but the cinematographer knew it wasn't his fault. The spirits were glaring back at them, and the distortion appeared only on that reel with the incantation scene. However, time was short and they decided to wrap up the production as quickly as possible. The movie was released and tickets for the premiere sold out fast, as Egyptian citizens were eager to get a taste of the rare homegrown horror movie. Yasin sat in a packed audience enjoying the fruits of his labor. When the incantation scene took place, a woman began screaming and crying. As people rushed to help her, others began to vomit, unable to control themselves. Some claimed they felt cold hands touching them, and others left the theater out of fear that something else other than just a movie was going on. And this wasn't a one-off incident. This happened all over the country whenever the film was being screened. One theater even burned down with no explainable source of the fire. That was enough for authorities to pull the movie. Yasin was devastated. The cinematographer was certain it was the incantation, and after close inspection, Yasin discovered the spiritualist's horrific act of deceit. Alfayek had purposely recited the exact words not to exorcise the jinn as instructed, but to open a portal. The crew was terrified. Egyptian culture is very strict about black magic. It was not to be messed with, and those who use it to hurt others will become servants of the devil. Yasin desperately tried to find Alfayek to retract the spell, but he seemed to have disappeared. Years later, Yasin received a strange phone call. Alfayek's wife had found him laying on his back on the floor of his office, his face blue as though he had been suffocated. His jaw was cracked open, and there was black tears running down his cheeks. His eyes were as wide as dinner plates staring at the ceiling, and above him was a dark stain that looked like a burn mark. When the police arrived, they discovered many handkerchiefs stained with blood and copious amounts of milk, both things synonymous with black magic. And there were hundreds of photos of celebrities with strange incantations and spells written on the back, including one of Yasin from their time on set. There was no logical explanation for his death. His autopsy showed no signs of physical trauma, poisoning, or even cardiac arrest. The case was closed quickly. No one wanted to return to the scene. It seemed Alfayek had truly become a servant of the devil, seduced by riches and infamy.
Thanks so much for listening. Like and share if this video gave you the chills. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the bell for notifications. See you next time.